Taking a look at South Africa and China celebrating 25 years of diplomatic relations, and this coincides with China handing over the chair of BRICS to South Africa next year. We're going across to be joined by Gwinyai Taruvinga, postdoctoral researcher at the Humanities Graduate Center at Wits University. Gwinyai, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
A very good morning to you. How are you today?
Yes, now doing absolutely well. In fact, couldn't be better on this Thursday morning. And looking at South Africa and China, this celebration of 25 years of diplomatic relations, what does it actually mean?
I think it means a lot, especially when looking at the global context and where the world is going. So, if we look at it from a historical perspective, I think official relations between China and South Africa, I think, began in 1998 after the fall of apartheid in 1994. So, I think 25 years of bilateral relations with China I mean, is a positive step for South Africa, especially with how South Africa not only views itself within the African continent, but also in a global arena as well.
Yes, now looking at South Africa and China and in terms of how we have benefited from each other in the last 25 years. We know China is a powerhouse, it is a superpower in global terms economically, and we know that the Chinese have had a huge interest in Africa and in South Africa, and this relationship that South Africa enjoys with China to the mutual benefit, I would say, of both countries, Gunyai.
Yes, most certainly. A few weeks ago, the South African Institute of International Affairs actually had a workshop in Rosebank in Johannesburg where they were, unpacking the role of China in South Africa and also on the African continent. And what we see is that not only does South Africa benefit, but it seems that most of the African continent is benefiting from a relationship with China. Hence, at the beginning of the interview, I mentioned the fact that this is a positive step in terms of South Africa, solidifying the relationship over the last 25 years. But to also hone into South Africa, I think the most important thing here is obviously the role that South Africa plays within BRICS, and that bilateral relationship with China is extremely important in that regard.
Yes. Now, interesting, you mentioned BRICS and the role that South Africa play in BRICS, but also at the same time, looking at what is playing out globally. We know that under with the Trump era, there was this whole issue between China and the United States of America, and looking at South Africa in terms of where we are, in terms of strategically, how do we align ourselves in the light of some of these global developments, and at the same time talking of BRICS, we know Russia is also a part of BRICS as well. And with what has been playing out between Russia and Ukraine, China has made its position very, very clear in terms of where it stands as far as this conflict goes. And looking at South Africa and how do we strategically position ourselves, looking at the West versus where we are members of BRICS, and we enjoy this relationship with China.
Yes, most certainly. And I think the most important thing for South Africa, and I think we've seen this with South Africa's foreign policy over the last few years, where it's mainly been that of non-alignment. So if you look closely at, for example, South Africa's stance towards the war in Ukraine, you see that South Africa sort of tried to distance itself in terms of not aligning itself with anyone, and also just preaching the gospel of peace, so to say. So I think in terms of the actual benefits that South Africa could gain, we see this with BRICS, especially with some of the initiatives that have been taken forward, such as, for example, the development of the bank, and also loans for particular projects, especially those that are linked towards sustainable development. So I think it's extremely important that in obviously looking at the relationship between South Africa and China, one of the most important things that South Africa needs to look at is obviously the notion of mutual benefit, the notion of obviously trying to see where South Africa can benefit. And I think South Africa, especially under the presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa, has done, I think, reasonably well in terms of benefiting from this bilateral relationship with China.
Yes, but also, Gwinya, there is criticism that has been leveled against the South African government in terms of not taking full opportunity, not taking full advantage of our relationship with China and being a member of BRICS. Because some of the observations is South Africa seems to be playing on both sides of the coin. And recently, COP27 has been a major, major talking point. And looking at this whole question surrounding just transition. Now, we know countries like China, India, who are part of BRICS, play absolutely no role as far as COP27 is concerned. Yet, South Africa has basically fallen into this where they said, you know what, we will take your loans, we will take your funding, and we will do whatever we need to from a just transition point of view. Yet, countries like China and India are ignoring what COP27 is actually saying. So, where do we actually stand where we're getting, I would say, for want of a better term, mixed signals coming out of South Africa, and where or who do we really or truly align ourselves with?
So I think you raise a very important point concerning COP27, and if you look at some of the feedback or some of what has been said, especially from trade unions in South Africa, is that the just transition. One of the debates around that is obviously how it involves the loss of jobs, especially with the transition to what we call the just transition. I think what we see within the South African context is that it is a regime under President Ramaphosa that is playing a delicate game, whereby foreign policy and diplomatic relations, as we see a lot of things play out behind the scenes, and what we see is a balancing act, and in many cases, hence we begin to see what you've just mentioned as mixed signals, whereby you're actually not sure where South Africa stands. But what we do see and what I have observed is that it is obviously this notion of a mutual beneficial relationship between South Africa and particular actors. Hence, we see that it is indeed mixed signals because you're not quite sure where the country stands, because you can almost argue to say that the country is on a knife edge. On the one hand, you have a relationship with China, BRICS, etc. Then on the other hand, you also have a relationship with the West. So if you recall, a few months ago, President Ramaphosa had a visit to the United States of America, where he met his counterpart, Joe Biden. And again, these questions again were asked to say, where exactly does South Africa stand? But in order, I think, to get a clearer picture, we can see where South Africa stands, especially when we take into consideration the war in Ukraine. And this notion of non-alignment is something that South Africa has always preached. So in terms of actually seeing where the country stands, one can argue to say that the country is non-aligned. And with that in mind, one would argue to say that the country works more on a notion of mutual benefit, on a notion of mutual benefit. Hence, we see, like I mentioned earlier, its relationship with BRICS and what has come out of that relationship.
Yes, and also I think living in a global village. This is important for South Africa as to where we need to make clear as to what our true position is. We know there is a scramble, and there has been a scramble for Africa, Guinea, for a very, very long time. And everybody is here. The Americans are here. The Europeans are here. The Chinese are here. The Turks are here. Everybody has been scrambling for Africa, and South Africa in particular, and particularly looking at South Africa, because South Africa has often been described as one of the powerhouses of the African economy, but I'm not too sure whether that still holds true considering where we are and where we've actually been heading. So I'm not too sure whether that is still true. So at the end of the day, it's all about positioning ourselves and making sure that, whoever it is, and I think more so looking at China now that the chair of BRICS will be handed over to South Africa. South Africa needs to be seen as being more visible and more vocal as far as its relationship with BRICS and China in particular goes.
Sorry, I lost you there for a little bit. My network had a
No, I'm just saying, with the chair of BRICS handed over to
bit of
South
it.
Africa next year, South Africa needs to obviously be a lot more vocal in terms of its relationship with China goes in terms of BRICS, because that would be something that would be expected of South Africa.
Yes, most certainly. And I think, again, it goes back to what we mentioned earlier about, mutual benefit and also this particular role of China, of South Africa rather, actually chairing BRICS, I think is an important step for South Africa, especially taking into consideration what you mentioned earlier, where you said how South Africa views itself not only on the African continent, but also from a global perspective as well. So with South Africa now chairing BRICS, I think it is an opportunity for South Africa to push its agenda of non-alignment, but also to see how it can position itself to benefit from BRICS. So if you recall, a few months ago as well, certain deals were made, especially in relation to food security, also in terms of BRICS leading the way in terms of research for vaccines. I think all these things are extremely important for BRICS, and South Africa should find a way through this position it's just attained of chairing BRICS to see how the country can benefit from the organization as well.
Well, good night. We definitely will be watching the space and looking ahead at next year, looking at BRICS in particular and how South Africa can take opportunity from being the chair of BRICS. But we definitely will follow developments. For now, as always, we thank you for your time.
It's a massive pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Queen Yai Taravinga was us this morning, looking at South Africa and China as we celebrate 25 years of diplomatic relations, and this at the same time coinciding with China handing over the chair of BRICS to our very own South Africa. And well, let's see who the president of the country is going to be comes the December electoral conference. The time is just gone, 19 minutes past 8, and we're going to go for a break. We'll come back. We'll be joined by a co-founder and head of the Dawa Education Publication at Islamic Lifestyle Solutions, Sheikh Fahim Mohammed. We're still talking about these unisex bathrooms that have been proposed by the Department of Basic Education.